I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle. And it truly is that. It truly is a conversation. No one is holding forth and expecting everybody else to listen and just simply receive everything that is handed down from on high. This is an opportunity for all of us to share life wisdom. And as it is particularly channeled through any one of several traditions. So the tradition that we are going to be drawing from today is the literary tradition with the topic of the empty page. I therefore really look forward to sharing with you the reading that we're going to have at the beginning of every one of our GEMS meetings for this year. And that is called Carving Your Statue by Plotinus. The piece goes like this: withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not find yourself beautiful yet, do as does the creator of a statue that is to be made beautiful. He cuts away here, he smooths there. He makes this line lighter, this other purer, until a lovely face has grown upon his work. So do you also. Cut away everything that is excessive, straighten all that is crooked, bring light to all that is overcast. Labor to make all one glow of beauty and never cease chiseling your statue until there shall shine out on you from it the godlike or goddess-like splendor of virtue. And so this year at Still and Moving Center is devoted to this idea of us chiseling our own statues. And so a lot of artistic types of themes are being taken up this year in the Still and Moving Center Almanac. And this topic is drawn from this week's theme. I'd like to especially introduce you to Janine Oshiro. She is not only one of Still and Moving Center staff members, she's also a very accomplished person in line with this topic. She has been a writing teacher at Windward Community College here on Oahu, and she has taught both beginning composition, poetry, and then she has also taught literature. So she is coming from a place of doing writing herself and also being acquainted with writers who have faced an empty page. So Janine, could you start us off, please?
Great. Well, first of all, I'm just so happy to see all of your smiling faces here. So I am going to get our discussion started by sharing a few ideas kind of based on my experience as a writer and as a writing teacher. And I know that there are some of you out there today that I've invited who are writers and writing teachers. So I'm especially looking forward to hearing your thoughts in our discussion when I'm done. But I wanted to actually start first by spending 1 minute with an empty page, not doing anything at all. And so if you have an empty page here, I'm just going to have us look at our pages for a moment, for 1 whole minute, and just see what comes up. And we will actually revisit this page at the end of our time together, at the end of my talk. So be with your empty page. Okay, thank you for spending a minute with an empty page as we embark upon this conversation. So I wanted to start by actually showing you. So I've kept some form of a journal since I was 14 years old. And somehow by habit or custom, somehow I have always left the first page empty. So this one's sort of falling apart, but I have journals and journals where the first page is empty before I actually begin. And actually, here's a photograph by my friend Shanda on the front of this journal. But I've always left this page empty, and I can't really say for sure why I've done it, but it just feels right. So thinking about this topic, I really considered, well, why have I been doing this for all these years, leaving this first page empty? So I think the first page actually feels a little bit like a protective layer. It feels like this protective space, like my thoughts would be like too naked, too exposed, too close to the surface, too public if I actually started writing right here. I also think the first page kind of holds a little bit of a charge. Like there's some pressure, like I need to write something really good on the first page. And so the second page actually just feels a little bit friendlier. So I start there. Skipping the first page definitely doesn't feel like it's a waste of paper to me. It does feel like it is the preservation of something really important. So I can look at the first page and I can pass through it into this other space. And so the first page, then that blank page becomes like a threshold for me. I enter into it and I enter into this space of my notebook that has been with me and has been such a great comfort for me in my life. So I want to begin with this idea that the empty page is not empty of meaning. So the empty page might represent freedom. It might represent unrestrained possibility, this space in which anything can happen. But the empty page might also really inspire fear, right? There's this great fear. I have nothing to say. I'm not original. If I say something, no one's going to understand me. I'm not good enough. So we might feel paralyzed with this pressure of creating something out of the nothingness of the empty page. So as Renee mentioned, I was a writing teacher for many years. And during that time, the empty page was most often this place of fear and insecurity for my students. And so part of my job then was to encourage students to fill up the empty page as quickly as possible before that paralysis set in. And so for that, we can thank the writer and teacher, Peter Elbow, who was this champion of free writing. I'm going to write, I'm going to keep my hand moving, I'm not going to think too much, I'm not thinking about spelling, I'm just spilling all my thoughts out on the page. I'm going to see what happens. So the empty page in this manner becomes a place of discovery. We don't really know what we have to say until we have said it. And so the writer William Stafford says, a writer is not so much someone who has something to say as he is someone who has found the process that will bring about new things he would not have thought of if he had not started to say them. So this process generates a lot of waste, or we can also just call it compost or fertile soil for our newly discovered seeds. So last week we heard a really beautiful talk from Malia on the theme of consecrating our work. And I've been thinking since then about how consecrating an empty page might change it. So I've been really fortunate to take a lot of Lomi Lomi massage trainings with Malia. And what I've really come to understand from my experiences with her is that if I begin by consecrating my work with prayer, with gratitude, with this attitude of openness, then I am not working alone. I feel myself connected to my teachers, my ancestors, to the land around me, to the mountains, to the ocean. I know my place among all of them. I know where I come from, and I know that I belong. So I acknowledge my influences, and I'm aware, somewhat aware, of how I'm either reflecting or resisting them. And when I begin with this awareness of where I am and those who've come before me, I can be my very best self. And I have the authority and the honor to begin. And so all of this I've really learned from Malia in the context of Lomi Lomi. But I've really been thinking about it a lot in relation to my work as a writer, in relation to this empty page. So if I approach the empty page this way, then it is no longer a place of fear. Or I can say it is a place of fear, but I also have the courage that I need to begin. So the empty page is not something that I have to compulsively fill. The empty page is not something that I have to conquer somehow. So I'd like to kind of take a moment to go back to this idea about if I make my work sacred, if I consecrate it, I'm not alone. For many years, when I was teaching full time, I wanted very badly to quit my job. I just wanted to sit alone in a room and write. I mean, I was very desperate to be alone. But I think that what I've really come to is that I am never really alone at my desk writing. My thoughts are always filled with the thoughts of others. My ideas about language have been so informed by my many teachers and my many friends. My rhythms and cadences in my poetry have definitely been shaped by the writers whose work I love. So I think this fact of not being alone is actually what gives me the courage and the strength to do my work. As I've thought about Malia's presentation, I keep coming back to this idea of influence. Who is traveling with me as I begin? And so I want to think about influence as opposed to imitation, right? So a lot of times in writing classes, we do these imitation exercises, to imitate the work of Dickinson or Whitman, and it becomes this form of play, this exercise. And in trying on someone else's voice, I learn a little bit more about making my own voice. So I feel that influence, like imitation, is a sort of step on the way to influence. But influence really requires this awareness of how I'm responding to the forces that shape me as a writer. I think influence is also about being aware of one's context. So the work that I do arises from certain historical and cultural conditions that I am continually learning about. So I'm connected to the writers who came before me and the forms that they've worked in and fought against. I belong to this lineage of writers and teachers who I love, and some of them I've only met in books. So, of course, it's not easy. The weight of certain writers might be really burdensome, and I may really struggle to resist their influence, or I might really consciously seek out company of other writers whose work I really admire. So I recently heard this podcast interview on being. There was this anthropologist, Agustin Fuentes, and he was talking just about the social nature of humans. And he said, humans are never really alone. Even when we are by ourselves spatially, sitting in a room, our thoughts are filled with others. Our bodies are even potentially carrying the skin cells of others. We are always thinking with and about other people, even when we are not with them. In fact, our resting neurobiological state, when you are at complete rest, the default state of the brain is social, the same one that turns on for social interactions. So that was really fascinating for me to hear. I thought, there goes my dream of sitting alone in a room by myself writing. So the French poet Paul Valéry says, "We say that an author is original when we cannot trace the hidden transformation that others underwent in his mind. What a man does either repeats or refutes what someone else has done, repeats it in other tones, refines or amplifies or simplifies it." So I'm really interested in this hidden transformation, because that's what feels like the magic and the mystery of writing, of creation. And I think what's important is that in this particular magic, the writer is not making something out of nothing. The writer is making something new out of the materials at hand. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about some literary influence. So like the poet Robert Haas, in his introduction to Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, called Song of Myself perhaps the most unprecedented poem in the English language. Like there had never been anything like this before. And at the same time, he also pointed out all of the materials that were at hand, that were part of this magical transformation. Right? The street talk, the blab of the pave, the language of work and trade, the vocabulary of science and technology, sermons, oration, journalism, the English odes that were written earlier in the century, the prophetic poems of the Bible, and the essays of Emerson, as all formal models. So it's an unprecedented poem that still really has its roots somewhere. It doesn't just come out of nothing. We can also look to the Romantic poet William Wordsworth, who said that the writer should owe nothing but to nature and his own genius. But still, his poems, his hidden transformations, made use of descriptions borrowed from his sister Dorothy's notebooks. And his famous 2 lines about the daffodils, "They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude," came from his wife, Mary. So we create from the materials we have at hand. We work in concert with the voices around us. We create something new, kind of pushing forward, rooted in collective ground. So I want to say here, the page may appear empty, but something is already there. So I've been thinking a lot about the poetic form of the erasure poem. Erasure like an eraser, like the end of a pencil, if you've never heard this term before. So the erasure poem. So in an erasure poem, a writer creates a work, a new work, out of something that already exists. So the writer is not really interested in creating something out of nothing. So to give you some examples, the poet Ronald Johnson erased parts of John Milton's Paradise Lost to create this 4-volume work. Jen Bervin erased parts of Shakespeare's sonnets to create this book called Nets. So making as if the sonnets were little nets catching these other poems. Srikanth Reddy spent 7 years erasing parts of a memoir by Kurt Waldheim, who was a Secretary General to the UN, who later was exposed as a Nazi SS officer, and he created a book called Voyager. Mary Ruefle, she was really interested in old primers, so she took a primer for girls and whited out parts of it to create little poems that sound very much like haikus. You can just to kind of give you a sense like what erasure might look like. So we have here 7 centuries of sobbing gathered in the twilight and had their pages wandered through. The dead borrow so little from the past, as if they were alive. But they're really striking. I mean, it's striking to see what she managed to do with a primer for girls. So in this year of self-crafting that Renee has laid out for us in the almanac, it seemed to me that like this erasure poem would be a really interesting consideration. So, you know, if we think about that reading at the beginning by Plotinus, the creator's working with something that already exists, cutting away there, smoothing here. So what I love about an erasure poem, in an erasure poem, the selected words and the selected empty space are really dynamically charged and in conversation with each other. So the empty space is preserved in such a way that the emptiness is not secondary to the words. There is no empty space, really. There is an acknowledgement of what was once there. So at the end of Nets, Jen Bourbon includes this working note that I would love to read for you. She says, I stripped Shakespeare's sonnets bare to the nets to make the space of the poems open, porous, possible, a divergent elsewhere. When we write poems, the history of poetry is with us, pre-inscribed in the white of the page. When we read or write poems, we do it with or against this palimpsest. And so this idea of the palimpsest, I mean, a palimpsest is like a manuscript page whose surface has been wiped clean, effaced to be reused, but we still see the remains of what was once there. So I think there's this idea there that we can never really fully erase something. Something will always remain. And I think in particular, like I kind of taking that thought further, I think I can spend all my time trying to erase every little bit that's there, and I could rip my paper to shreds, or I could try to find a way to work with the marks that are left there, perhaps, or find some meaning there. So I want to end my talk by sharing a video of Tracy K. Smith reading an erasure poem. And Tracy K. Smith was the Poet Laureate of the US from 2017 to 2019. And she did something really astonishing. She took a well-known document, the Declaration of Independence, and she erased parts of it to create a poem that really illuminates this contradiction that is at the heart of our democracy. So I know we all know the Declaration of Independence, but I'll read just the beginning. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that is the beginning of this document that she erased, because we are also a country that is built on slave labor and would in many cases rather just erase that and say it never even existed. So I think this poem is really remarkable in how it takes this existing document and makes it new. It gives us this new vision for today. It erases, and yet we're really aware of everything that is no longer seen. What has been erased is still present, and the empty space kind of propels the poem forward with everything that's left unsaid. So I'm going to share this video.
This is one of the poems that's really kind of thinking about history. And it is written by taking the Declaration of Independence and deleting most of it. What I heard in what remained, or what remains, seemed really uncanny and poignant. Declaration. He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people. He has plundered our, ravaged our, destroyed the lives of our, taking away our, abolishing our most valuable, and altering fundamentally the forms of our. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here, taken captive on the high seas to bear.
Such a powerful poem. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the poem on the empty page. But before we move into our discussion, I'd actually like to take another minute to look at your empty page, to look at your blank page, and just see if it offers you the same thing, see if it offers you anything different than what it offered you at the beginning. So be with your empty page for a minute. I felt like I could have been with my empty page for a lot longer, but I know we have limited time, so. So I'd love to open it up and hear the thoughts that you have about your empty page, about the empty page in your life, how you approach it.
Thank you so much, Janine. May I ask if, after this really thought-provoking presentation you've given us, if we can expand the idea of the empty page to the unplanted garden, to the unfilled itinerary for the journey ahead of us, can we use it analogically to any of those things? So even if we don't have much of an experience as writers or writing teachers, that would still be probably applicable.
I had a very interesting experience. First off, I have that same habit. Every time I begin the notebook, the first page is always blank. But for your exercise, I went to the next blank page and stared at it. But it ended up having notes on it after your discussion. So I thought, well, what the heck, I'll flip back to the original empty page. And as I stared at it, what I noticed was its translucence. And I could see bits of what was underneath it, as though echoing your idea that we're drawing from things previous. So my blank page was no longer blank. It was beginning to show me things from the past. Great talk, thank you. I had never thought before as to why I leave that blank. When I did try to explain it to myself, I thought, well, maybe I'm going to have a thought that came before what I write that should go on the blank page. And rarely does that ever happen.
Malia?
I just want to say, Janine, I look forward to listening to this talk again and again in the future. I feel so inspired. And we just took down our Christmas tree, so I'm sitting in like the empty page, the blank page of where Christmas is. And I just thought that the way you described originality as not being able to see the transformation that has already occurred from what really helped to grow and nourish whatever the work is. And I just thought that was really compelling. I don't know that I've thought of it like that. But I just wanted to say thank you for that thought, and recognizing that when we transform and we create something original, it really comes from all of our experiences and teachers and influences from before. But it's kind of interesting. What is that magic space of transformation that kind of smooths all of the influence out into something that appears to be totally original? So I don't know if you have any other word for that transformation space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems almost like when I think about it, it feels to me like something like something has been buried deep in the ground, and I just cannot dig it up. Right? I mean, like if I dig it up, I'm going to ruin it. That something is happening that is so beyond me. I mean, that thing that is happening, like. Like I've had this sense of like, okay, just wait, like don't dig this up too soon, or don't bring this to the light of day yet. Like, but I don't really know. I feel kind of at a loss as about really what that, but that's why it is magical and a mystery.
As like the magic.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But Malia, I was thinking that maybe erasure poems would be something that you could work on with your daughter in homeschooling. I mean, it might be something really fascinating for her to look at documents or stories and kind of make something new.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with, I haven't ever heard of an erasure poem before. At first, I thought that we actually have something very similar in Hawaiian culture and poetry, where a chant from an older time can be changed a little bit and represented. And it's not a bad thing. It's not like plagiarism. It's not looked down upon. It's just honoring. And so there's a pretty famous hula chant called Lili'ue that is describing all of the beauties of Lili'u, but it originally was a chant called Kina'ue. And all the words are the same except for the name had changed from one ali'i to another. And how it's actually it's not looked down upon as something bad. It's just culturally a way of honoring. So I thought at first that was what the erasure was, but it's totally different, because the way that you described it, it's that space in between is dynamic as well. So yeah, I'll be thinking about this for a long time.
And actually, as I was looking up various other things about erasure poems, and I came upon something that I'd never thought of or heard of before. But someone was making these erasure poems that were more like cover-ups, kind of like taking a page like this and then using like sand or like leaves and like covering words up instead of like crossing them out or whiting them out. But it seemed like such a great thing to do outside, like to go outside and to have this experience of covering up with some dirt or some leaves or something, and just seeing, well, yeah, what words are left that really stand out to you, that really have some sort of spark. But as a way also to be outside doing something with words. It seemed to me like something really worth trying.
Yeah, it also struck me that it almost seems like a cipher. You know how there are certain texts that are held below, that if you have like your key and you can figure out the cipher, then there's this other message that pops up. And so it's just so fascinating. I've never heard of this. So all this hidden knowledge that can be expressed in different ways, and it's, the expression of the individual to discover or to reveal or to highlight a word or not. It's so fascinating. Thank you.
Fox News and CNN do it all the time. Make up whole new stories just by editing out important details.
Oh, Susan, I see you have your
Yeah,
hand up.
well, thank you, Janine. That was really, you said so many things that were really fascinating. And, and I like the idea that, especially when Tracy Smith was reading her poem, that the spaces were full of meaning, right? They were very evocative, and how, and I like the, your talk is like the emptiness actually is meaningful and necessary, and I mean, as writers, I think you try to put it in with punctuation, or, there's that pause that's important. But when you see those erasure poems and there's that space, and that space is important, you can't just fill it up and have it mean the same. Anyway, you said so many really fascinating things that I made me think, because just like you and David, I keep that first page blank, and I like the way you thought about it. It's like it is that kind of division between the public space and the private space, and that necessary transition, I think, between the public and private. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you said so many things that really, had me thinking about the art. So thank you.
You're so welcome, Susan. Yeah, and I also wanted to just echo what Renee said before. So I did approach this as a writer, but I think what is so amazing about this topic and this empty page is that it is so much about any beginning. And also this topic, Renee, made me think so much about other previous topics we've had. Like, it made me think back to beneficent sleep, one of our topics from December. Just this, the empty page also as this time of rest and pause and kind of time of digestion, where other processes are going on that are so necessary. So if you have other things that do not relate to writing, please bring them forward. Yeah, Maurice.
Yes, just a couple of reactions. First, in terms of the blank page, the first time I looked at it, I'm not a writer, but it was kind of blank, but I became aware of my breathing. And then the second time I looked at it, I saw all kinds of like life atoms leaping up out of the page, literally just coming out like this was an alive page. So I don't know what that was about, but maybe there's a similarity with another comment. If there's, I don't necessarily have one religion, but if there is something I really strongly believe in and have actually written about, is the Declaration of Independence. And normally, if someone would have erased it and said the words, for example, or expressed the ideas that were expressed here, I might have almost got offended, because it's like, what are you doing to my sacred Declaration of Independence? But in fact, it was very interesting. I had the opposite reaction. And the opposite reaction is that those words couldn't have been spoken if it wasn't for the Declaration of Independence, because that was what was being so-called erased. But it really wasn't being erased. It was just the catalyst for ideas and facts that were necessary to say. But the Declaration was the catalyst for it. So it wasn't either or. I didn't have to get offended. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think just that saying that, like, it wasn't either or. I feel like that, that's like the space of poetry. Right? In the space of poetry, we're so often in this space of, it doesn't have to be either or. We're in this liminal space, or we're in this space in which we don't have to be confined by certain binaries. So much more becomes possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really, thank you for sharing that. I I do think that it is, as I was thinking about erasure and also that particular poem, I thought, you know, there is this chance for people to feel very offended or to even make this connection as David did with Fox News. I mean, that's something that I definitely thought about, you know, I mean, there is all of this kind of very dangerous illusion that is going on in our world right now, where people don't want to see certain things. But I mean, I think that like that poem by Tracy K. Smith, I think comes from such a different place. You know, it does not come from a place of like, I want to say something that just fits with my already existing beliefs. I mean, I think we can know that she is grappling with her lived experience, with her experience, also in relation to this document that is so important in our country. But yeah, but thanks, Maurice.
Just a few thoughts, trying to turn my mic on here. Thank you so much, Janine. I really enjoyed that. And I, to pick up on the discussion just as it was happening now, it seemed to me that that poem, that erasure poem that you played for us at the end, was so much tied to the current moment, our current experience in this country with the historic events that we've just witnessed this week. Mm-hmm. Because we have the, on one side, one could say, one way to frame it, not to oversimplify things or to put people in a category, but one way to frame these events is that people using what they believe to be their given rights under the Constitution and the Declaration, which was the source of the Constitution, to protest a lawful event taking place that is supposed to be free from violence and free from any kind of coercion based on external pressures and so on, right? It was more like a formality. But anyway, it was taking this a sacred day, really, in our country and showing how it can be seen in a very different way. So to me, what she did, what she illustrated with that erasure was showing how one can take those ideas and perceive undercurrents, perceive things that it's like it has this pure potentiality in it that can either be used for the good or can be used in a destructive way. So that's just one comment. To me, it seemed like it was the reason you had chosen that poem was because it fit for this week, in my eyes. But just a couple other thoughts about the idea of the empty page, which I was immediately reminded of, and I loved all your thoughts about how one is never alone, that we're constantly being influenced by the thoughts of other people, by our own experience. I mean, thoughts are things that are in the air. We may not be able to see them. We may not even remember them. We may not even be aware that we're being influenced by thought. We are constantly in this ocean of thought that is humanity. So we're never alone, even when we think we're most alone. But the empty page reminded me also of Lao Tzu's very famous line from the Tao Te Ching, where his advice is return to the state of the uncarved block. Return to the state of the uncarved block. And what does he mean by that? Well, I don't claim to know, but it's also reminiscent of this idea which you find in Hindu philosophy and in Buddhism as well, actually, that before the universe came into being, it rested in a state that was what from one perspective might seem like a void or an emptiness. And that's, in fact, in Buddhism, it's called shunyata, is emptiness. But if you understand the term in greater depth, it's really a divine potentiality. It's a plenum. It's spoken of as an inexhaustible plenum, because it's that place from which the cosmos arises, right? Everything that's going to take place in the cosmos is hidden, is at rest in that potentiality, you know. So it's a really beautiful idea. And it connects up with the ideas of compassion as well, because it's dwelling in that place in which there of a unitary self, of a unitary condition, that embraces both non-being, which is part of our life. Sleep is part of our life. Dying is part of life. And being, you know, so that the blank page embraces both in a way. There's just a few thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much, Kurt. Malia.
Hello, I just wanted to add one thing from the hula tradition. So we also have this inclusion of the uncarved block of wood. In the hula altar, there's a block of wood that's uncarved, and I believe it also represents that potential. And in certain hula ceremonies, the dancers wear completely unmarked garments. So no designs or dyes, just unmarked garments, so that the hula can be the thing that shines. It's like the clothing is the blank page, and then the dancer can evoke whatever story is being shared. So, but just with that block of wood, it really triggered that thought in terms of hula. And then we also wear our blank pages, because many hula are marked very very elaborately, with different designs that have lots of different meanings. But certain ceremonies, it is like consciously blank.
That is really fascinating. I don't want to pick on you, Ben, but what Malia just said made me think about what you've talked to me before about this neutral mask sort of thing. I wonder if that's something that you might bring into this conversation. It would be interesting for others to hear. I think it relates really well with what Malia just said.
Yeah, the neutral mask is like an attempt to go to emptiness, but there's an understanding that you can't make it completely in this plane, but that it's worthwhile aiming towards it. And a lot of this talk also reminds me of cosmology, and this sense that you're going between a void, that is a pregnant void that embraces all, and then all of a sudden you have everything, you know. So they talk about as you go back towards the Big Bang, everything is going more dense and more energetic, and it just becomes this fog, so that even on an electron or the smallest particles, a quark, cannot exist. It's just so dense, but it's also infinitely small. And you know, maybe that comes out of a void. It's like a seed that lands in the void. Or reminds me also of the story of the virgin birth, where you needed this purity for the spark to come, and then you have this amazing creation.
Thanks, Ben. Doris or Melissa or Alex, I wonder if anyone else? Yeah, Doris.
Thank you very much, Janine. That was a wonderful talk. The first time I looked at my page, I thought, well, hello, friend, because I am sort of faced with that blank page several times a week through Still and Moving Center. You know, I give little talks before some of the classes. So I have to often think about what to write. And then when that inspiration doesn't come, it's like, you know. And then for me, I have to not only write it, and then I have to translate it into Japanese. So it's kind of like a double type of, you know, situation. The first time I looked at it, I thought, you know, I never looked at it, but why is there a double, you know, like a double line going vertically? That was something I sort of never thought about, but being forced to sort of look at this paper with no thoughts in mind, that was kind of interesting. And then But anyway, coming back to it the second time, looking at the blank page, somehow it didn't seem as scary, or it seemed friendlier for some reason. I don't know if it was my imagination. And so with that, again, as I think Kirk had just mentioned, just you're saying that you're never alone, that you bring so much when you write something, you bring so much of your own experiences and things you've read and to your writing, that I think from now it'll be a lot nicer experience when inspiration does not hit immediately. But thank you very much. And the other thing my takeaway is I never knew how to say that word primer. I've seen that word in the Little House, the Laurel Ingalls Wilder books oftentimes. And I always thought you pronounce it primer. So thank you for that.
I think it's pronounced, now I'm doubting myself. Is it primer? I've heard it as primer, but who knows?
But you're the first person to have said it out loud.
I've said it out loud. I know.
Yeah,
I know how that is.
There are a lot of words that you just read and it's only in your mind. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's because otherwise why is it spelled with 2 M's, but English is a funny language that way. So,
yes, thank you. I'm so glad, Doris, that that the page was a friendlier place for you. Alex, looks like you have your hand up.
I just was listening in most of the time. I have to, work, so I'm like listening while I work. But I really, just especially the erasure poetry, something about that really stuck with me. I've never heard of that. Just sort of almost going the opposite way. I don't know how to explain it or why it just sort of stuck with me, but I really did appreciate the talk. I wish I could have paid a little bit more attention, but I have to pay attention to the work list. So
yeah, it's
but
okay, Alice. Yeah,
I like being able to hear, and I did enjoy everything I heard, and I really learned something from it. So thank you.
You're welcome. And it's great. I encourage everyone to go out and find some text that you would like to play with, to try your own erasure poem. And then Alex, I see your name says Laurel, but I know that you're Alex. So
I'm Alex. Yeah. Thank you so much, Janine, for that really lovely presentation and for everybody's contributions to, I love that word, the palimpsest. All the layers building up on the foundation that you gave us. Honestly, when I looked at my blank page, I could not help but think of Monday and my job teaching writing at Kapiolani Community College. And I'm going to have to do what you were talking about, just work with students to overcome the fear of feeling this thing and how that's coming. And I also teach that method, that free writing method that you mentioned. And I remember once I was trying to explain it to students in class, and something came out in, just the process of me filling that space with words and ideas. And I was just sort of, I was kind of freelancing and just talking. And I said and just let your brain get crazy. Just be crazy and let those ideas go out. And for some reason with that class, that phrase really resonated and it worked, and I started calling the beginning of the writing process. I still do it. This was, 15 years later, but I call it crazy writing. And your talk made me think about the wisdom of that strategy of continuing to call that crazy writing, because of the times that we live in and what that implies and what I'm actually asking students to tap into, whatever we would call craziness. I think that we are all teachers in some way. And when we're teaching something, it's not just the subject matter. Like for me, it's writing, or it could be cooking. But when you're teaching, you're also teaching life habits and you're teaching mental habits, and your talk made me really reflect on the idea of teaching craziness, as a mental habit, because we have to fill the page. We have to, overcome that fear. And we tend to frame it as like boredom, you know, or deficiency if it's not filled.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just starting to, I've been moving more with myself in my own life and also as an educator to try to also integrate calmness into the creative process, you know, and just wondering how can we teach ourselves and the students that we work with, and how can we honor calmness, you know, and blankness, and not look at it as boredom or as deficiency, but as what everybody's been saying, of the potential for something to emerge, and you know, and just a break from the craziness that we live in constantly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have definitely felt that in the last 5 days. You know, just feeling assaulted by the
Mm-hmm.
craziness of what's happening in the world. And you know, the blank page is also about the size of a screen. You know, it's like just about the same size as a laptop screen, and it's so nice, I have found, to just turn it off sometimes in these last 5 days. Just, you know, I kind of can't, but when I find, you know, the wherewithal to turn off the screen finally, and to just, you know, have a clearer head, it's felt like a very healthy practice. So that's what you helped me reflect on, you know, just how the world can be crazy, and we actually teach that, and we, you know, we value that in some ways because it's like creativity. But on the other end of it, that method of the erasure poem, I'd like to try that in my life. You know, what can I just erase from my life, and just to kind of see what is fundamental and what is left, you know, that is truly important. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for those thoughts. And I think I see Sharon has her hand up, and so maybe we'll have Sharon as our last contributor here.
I was a teacher of children with learning problems, and I just thought your way of presenting was very delicious, the way to write. I used slam poetry instead, where they would write, you know, immediate thoughts, and you write it down, and then you cross it out. So many, any one. But your erasure just got at me because I was thinking, and part of the thing is that everything we do or write is not created by our own, but from somewhere or something. And I found it with my blank paper, because as I had it down, I accidentally picked up water spots on it. And so as I looked at it, I thought, oh, you know, it looks like a piece of art. And it's very beautiful, actually, because I've seen like indentations of art posted like that. And the second time at the end, when we brought it back, the water had evaporated, but there were still impressions from that water spots that were still there. So then it made me think about your way of doing erasure and writing, and nothing is original. And we pick it up from somewhere, and it's just transposing it to put it together and to form that. And there's still an impression, like he said, his first blank page and the back of it, he's pricked it up. You still get whatever we learn from our experiences or our past, we have it. And sometimes we don't know how to express it or put into form, but we do. But I love the way you did. I wish I knew that erasure way to do it. I've only do it to slam poetry, because it was a way a kid just immediately write things that come to their mind when you give them a phrase or word, and you cross out everything except one, and then you put it together. But I think this way you can get something, like you say, and that's past experiences or past something you don't even dislike, and put it there and form by doing erasure on it. So thank you. It was great.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I see that we are past our time, so I want to respect the time, and maybe Renee would like to say a few words to conclude.
Yes, thank you so much. I certainly feel as though my intuition that asking for Janine to be our speaker would be a good idea. I feel it was exactly the right choice, and all of us, if we could just give a little round of applause, that was really marvelous. It was really a great segue from Malia's talk last week, as you mentioned, about consecrating our space, and into next week's. Our theme next week will be facing our fear. And that certainly came up as something when people look at that blank page, is that sense of fear arises. So our presenter for next week is going to be a professor at UH named Ramdas Lam, who as a young American went to India and became a sadhu. So he's now in the religious studies department, and he'll be speaking from the Hindu ascetic tradition. So thank you all so much for your, whether you are a listener, you were part of the blank page that was containing the words that were spoken by others today. And we certainly thank Janine ever so much.